sure about, if you're not able to follow because you don't see a screen or something like that, feel free to speak up and we'll try to describe what we're showing if there's a map or something like that. So we're going to get started. The topic of tonight's meeting is Albemarle County Transit Expansion Study. This is the second round of stakeholder outreach that we're now engaging in. A few months ago, we had the first round where it was really more of a kind of listening sessions where we heard from the public and other stakeholders on kind of what issues were on their mind regarding mobility in Albemarle County. So in tonight's meeting, we're actually going to be presenting some scenarios, ways to improve transit service in Albemarle County. And we'd love to get feedback from all of you as we talk through the scenarios. So that being said, I guess I'll introduce myself. I'm Boris Palchik. I'm with Foursquare Integrated Transportation Planning. We're one of the two consultants working on this project along with Michael Baker. There's a few of my colleagues who are on the line as well. So we'll be taking notes, Laura Duke, Jeremy Strauss. And then there's a few people from Albemarle County and the Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission. I don't know, maybe it's worth having them introduce themselves as well. So Lucinda, you wanna start us off?
Thanks, Boris. I'm Lucinda Shannon with the Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission. I am the staff person for the Regional Transit Partnership, and I'm also working on the Transit Vision Plan. You can reach me at the TJPDC. Okay,
great. Let's see, Christine, you want to go next?
Sure. Christine Jacobs, Executive Director of Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission.
Great. Kevin?
Kevin McDermott. I'm a planning manager at Albemarle County.
Okay, Jessica.
Hi, Jessica Hirsch-Ballering, transportation planner at Albemarle County.
Okay, Sandy.
Hi, Sandy Shackelford, Director of Planning and Transportation at the Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission.
Great. And I know, since we don't have a huge group, maybe we'll just go ahead and continue doing introductions for everybody. Lee Condor, do you want to introduce yourself? You're on mute. Lee, I think you're on mute.
Oh, there we are. Yeah, I'm a member of CTAC that was designated to participate in this.
Okay, great. Thanks for joining us. Peter Krebs.
Hi, I'm Peter Krebs. I'm a community planner and organizer for the Piedmont Environmental Council.
Thanks so much. Let's see, who do we have? Max. Let's see, Max, what's Max's last name? Marcilla? How about Caetano?
Hi, my name is Caetano de Campos Lopez. I'm with C3, Community Climate Collaborative. I am the Director of Climate Policy for the organization. Thank you.
Okay, Nicole Jones. How about Peter Thomas, or Thompson, sorry.
I'm not sure, I'm only on the phone. Can you hear me?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Peter Thompson, Executive Director of the Center at Belvedere. I'm also the chair of the Charlottesville Area Alliance Transportation Work Group and sit as a non-voting member of the RTP with that hat. And I'm also on the RIO 29 Community Advisory Committee.
Oh, great. Thanks for joining us. All right, I think that's all the names that I can see, but if there's anybody who I missed who just is showing up as a phone number, please feel free to introduce yourself. All right, well, we'll just get started then. So a little bit about the background of this project before we get into some of the service scenarios and preliminary recommendations. So the goal of this project is to identify short-range opportunities to expand transit service in key population and employment centers in Albemarle County. So specifically, we're looking at 3 areas of Albemarle County. 2 of them are growth areas, so that's the US 29 North Corridor, approximately from the city limits of Charlottesville up to the North Fork, UVA Discovery Park, or Ravenna Station area. The other growth area is the Pantops area, which is east of Charlottesville. And then the third area we're looking at is Monticello. So that's a major cultural destination. So those are the three key areas of Albemarle County where we're trying to develop recommendations for improving and expanding transit service. So the first thing that I want to mention is that there are many different ways to improve transit service. There are many different ways to operate transit service, and we've been looking at a wide range of solutions for Albemarle County. Each of these ways, each of these transit modes, you can call it, has their own ideal operating environment. So when we're looking at things like fixed route service, which is kind of like traditional bus service, let me see, I think I gotta mute somebody. Laura, can we mute everybody? All right, perfect. So for fixed route transit service, you guys hear me? Yes, okay, for fixed route transit service, density is key. The more people and jobs you have per acre, the greater the ridership potential is of a transit service. So density is a major driver of transit use when you talk about fixed route service. Another important component to ensure the success of fixed route service is that you have a supportive pedestrian environment. That means things like sidewalks, crosswalks, kind of a grid network of streets, as opposed to dead-end streets, circuitous kind of cul-de-sacs and things like that. So this image on the right here sort of illustrates that point. As you get more and more dense, you kind of open up the possibility of considering more and more types of transit service. And then when you go in the other direction to more suburban or rural areas, some of those options sort of fall away. So if you're in a suburban or rural area, you may not really be able to justify implementing frequent high capacity transit service, things like that. But there are options that still exist to you. So things like shared mobility that we'll talk about, things like commuter service, those are still sort of in play, even as you move into the more lower density suburban environments. So fixed route transit service generally works best when you have a density of more than 5 people and or jobs per acre. So on this map, that is areas that are yellow or more, so yellow or orange or red. Those are areas that do have the density to support fixed route service. And there was a question of whether this presentation will be available. So yes, it'll be posted on the website. We'll cover that at the end, but it'll be posted on the project website. So areas that are green or gray, those are areas that don't quite have the density that we like to see when we're considering fixed route transit service. Now that doesn't mean that those areas don't have their own mobility needs. They certainly do. And this map is focusing on the 29 North corridor that we'll be talking about. And it's kind of an example where you do have pockets of higher density, but overall it's a fairly low density environment, even though it is changing, even though there's new development coming. So for lower density areas or areas that have a challenging pedestrian environment, other alternatives do exist to fixed route service. So one of those alternatives is commuter type service, park and ride type service. That's similar to what Jaunt provides today with their 29 North service or their 29 North Express service. The reason that commuter service does work in lower density suburban environments is because generally people are expected to kind of congregate at a park and ride or some other place, and they make their way to that location versus in a more urban fixed route setting where people typically walk to or from a bus stop, and so there needs to be that supportive pedestrian environment. With commuter park and ride service, very often people are either dropped off at a park and ride or they drive to a park and ride and they leave their car. The other type of service that works fairly well in a lower density environment is what's called demand response service, or the new kind of term for it is microtransit. So microtransit is a technology-driven demand response service. So what demand response service in general means is it's a type of transit service that is kind of like a door-to-door on-demand type service. In the past, people have called it dial-a-ride service. It doesn't have a set route. It doesn't have set bus stops. Rather, people request it as needed. The vehicle comes to them and takes them to their destination. Because of advances in technology kind of throughout society, now there's a type of demand response service called microtransit, which is technology driven. Anyone who has used Uber or Lyft before will be instantly familiar with the way that microtransit works. It's the same sort of interface where you reserve a trip on a smartphone app. With microtransit, there's also a backup phone-in option that does exist, but that's how it works, very much like Uber and Lyft. But it's different from Uber and Lyft in a couple of important ways. Number one, microtransit tends to have a dedicated fleet. So with Uber and Lyft, you kind of get what you get in terms of the vehicle that shows up to pick you up. With microtransit service, the fleet usually it's a finite fleet, not an infinite fleet like you sort of have with Uber and Lyft, but the fleet that does exist is specific for transit. So it's either cutaway buses, as they're called, so short buses, minivans, bigger vans, and sometimes even like these souped-up golf carts that Kevin mentioned earlier. So those are the types of vehicles, the type of fleet that typically operates with microtransit. The other thing that sets microtransit apart from your Uber and Lyft type of shared use services is that fares on microtransit tend to be predictable and affordable. With Uber and Lyft, you don't quite know what fare you're gonna get at the end of the trip. Maybe it'll be $10 or maybe it'll be $20 if there's surge pricing or things like that. Microtransit service is much more closely kind of associated with and governed by public entities. So it might be part of a transit agency, or it might be sponsored by a county or a city or something like that, and they set the fares. So these are publicly set fares, so they are much more predictable and typically in the $2 to $3 range. Microtransit's an effective approach to auto-oriented environments because the vehicles can get to people that otherwise would not be able to get to a bus stop because of the lack of pedestrian because of lack of pedestrian environment that typically is needed to support fixed route service. Microtransit is also a data-rich platform. What that means is that every trip that's reserved is kind of documented on the app, and then ultimately that information goes into a database, and that information can be used by planners to highlight where there are emerging corridors or emerging markets for transit service. In other words, as transit planners, we do try to predict where fixed route service may work, and we do that based on demographics, based on land use, and so on. But microtransit actually allows us to look at real world data on where the demand is materializing. So microtransit can be used to gauge demand, and then later, at some later stage, you can replace microtransit or complement microtransit with a fixed route service as well, if the demand warrants it. So any questions on microtransit? We will be talking a lot about this mode as we continue on this evening, but are there any questions about this mode of transit service? All right. So then we will, yep, Lee, go ahead.
Well, is Jaunt that yet, or is it not quite there?
So Jaunt is not quite there, but they're similar. They are in the larger sense, both what Jaunt offers and microtransit are a demand response service. So most of Jaunt service, because Jaunt does operate a few fixed routes, but for the most part, Jaunt is a demand response type of service. It uses vehicles like this one here, and the vehicles are reserved by phone for the most part. Microtransit takes it sort of a step further in the technology continuum and allows people to skip the dispatcher and go directly to booking the trip themselves from their mobile device.
What would it take? Then it shouldn't be too hard for Jaunt to evolve into microtransit then.
That's right. So microtransit can be operated as a turnkey contracted service, or it can be kind of a technology overlay onto an existing service. So in the case of Jaunt, they already have the drivers, they already have the vehicles. All they would need to do is overlay the technology. So that usually involves installing tablet devices onto the vehicles, enabling kind of a cell connection for those tablet devices, and then also loading a platform. So there needs to be a platform that does the booking and the dispatch dispatching. So those are the key elements. And once that's done, then users download the same platform onto their own personal devices, and they're able to reserve trips and see where the vehicle is in real time, and often make payments as well. So does that make sense? Yep. Peter?
Hey, Boris, you may get into this later, but one of the things I've wondered about microtransit is I could imagine from a planning perspective, there could be cases where microtransit makes more sense than fixed route, but it could be very difficult to transition from fixed route to microtransit for prestige and lots of other reasons. And in your work, have you seen that change happen successfully, or is it always like getting integrated into basically places where there's not already legacy systems?
No, actually so microtransit is kind of new on the scene, and because it's so new, there is still a lot of experimentation going on all over the country and even all over the world on applications of this technology. And we have seen cases where fixed route service that has not been effective, like the ridership has been low for whatever reason, has been replaced with microtransit service, and the microtransit has been a better fit, just because in many cases it's because of the reasons I previously mentioned. It's like low density, suburban environment, lack of sidewalks, things like that. And microtransit has been a better fit than fixed route service in that case. It also sometimes, I hate to say it this way, but since it's so new, it doesn't quite have the stigma that other modes of transit have in some communities. I mean, there are communities like Washington, D.C., where transit is pretty ubiquitous and everybody uses it, and there's people don't think twice about it. But there are other communities where transit is not always viewed as something that is for the entire community, so to speak. And microtransit seems not to create those same perceptions. So people are familiar with Uber and Lyft, and this operates very much like Uber and Lyft, just using publicly funded vehicles, or publicly supported, and so it just does seem to resonate a little bit more with some suburban communities than fixed route service. Lee, did you have another question? Okay. So let us move on then. So we'll begin with the 29 North study area. So there are two scenarios that we're going to be presenting for the 29 North. And both of them are focused on expanding transit service, as the title of the project of the study suggests. So in scenario one, this is achieved through a microtransit pilot project, or proposed microtransit pilot project, north of the Rivanna River. So right here, you see the Rivanna River kind of snakes through over here. And in this case, we have designated north of the Rivanna River as the microtransit zone. So the microtransit service has the key metric that people kind of look at to judge the convenience and the success of microtransit service is the wait time. So in other words, once you book a trip, how long does it actually take to be picked up? If it takes an hour or 2 hours, then you're kind of back to where you started, because the traditional dial ride model, which Jaunt operates now, that always requires advanced reservation. So sometimes up to 2 days in advance or more. And so it's not a mode that lends itself to, kind of on the fly decisions of, oh, I want to go out, I want to go to the store, I want to run an errand. It requires a lot of advanced planning. And that is a barrier for some people to consider that type of service. Microtransit, because of the technology component, allows for very short lead times for booking. So even up to 10 minutes on average, 10, 15, 20 minutes, those are the typical wait times that you see with microtransit service. So we set an average wait time of 10 minutes as our kind of threshold. And to achieve 10-minute wait times in this zone, that can be achieved with having 2 vehicles operating concurrently, because it's a function of how large is the zone and how many vehicles are out there in that zone. If you have a very large zone, obviously you need more vehicles to be able to guarantee reasonable wait times. So for a 10-minute average wait time, 2 vehicles are sufficient for this particular zone. So we are proposing initially that the microtransit service would operate on weekdays only within this zone from approximately 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. Because the microtransit service does not extend to Charlottesville or to UVA or the key destinations that people want to go to, there needs to be a transfer point where people can transfer from microtransit service into the broader CAT network or CAT and jaunt network. So we've sort of designated the Walmart that's up north on the 29 corridor as that transfer location. There is service there today, and CAT is proposing the Route 7, which is their most frequent service with the longest service hours. They're proposing for that to extend to the Walmart. So that is where we're proposing, people can use the microtransit service for internal circulation, but they can also use it to make connections into the CAT network. Let me pause because I think there were a few different questions. Let me open up the chat to see what that was. Okay, so Kitano, I answered the question. Okay. Okay, so yeah, so it looks like we're good on the questions. So the jaunt connection opportunities would be the Walmart would be the CAT connection opportunities. There would also be jaunt connection opportunities. In this scenario, we're not proposing any changes to the 29 North service. That's this commuter blue line here. So jaunt connection opportunities would be available at Food Lion and Hollymead, and as well as a few other stop locations that they have: Lockwood Drive at Abington Place, Plaza, and Town Center Drive at Community Street. So we have projected that this zone would generate approximately 35 riders per weekday in the beginning. It may increase over time. If it increases over time, you may get to the point where the wait times get longer and longer as the demand increases. And so you may need to make adjustments, like the 2 vehicles may no longer be sufficient. It may need to be 3 or 4, depending on how the demand rises. So in scenario 1, the other recommendations, first of all, are implementing the CAT service changes that CAT has been holding a series of public meetings themselves, and those public meetings have been presenting a few changes to their network. We're fully supportive of their recommendations. I'm not going to go into all of them, but just a couple of relevant ones to this plan. Route 7, which is this purple line here, would extend to the Walmart, and Route 5 would terminate at Fashion Square Mall. So having Route 7 extend to the Walmart is kind of key to this all working, because like I said, Route 7 is sort of the premier route that CAT operates with high frequency and long hours of service. As far as jaunt goes, we're proposing that the 29 North essentially stays as is. And this recommendation with the microtransit service could actually strengthen the 29 North service, because it could feed riders into the 29 North service. Right now, it's out there, up in the northern part of the county, but it has no supporting services. So people either can make their way to the 29 North Express service, or they can't. I shouldn't say there's no other service, because jaunt itself actually does operate demand response service, but that is something that does require advanced reservations, and so it's not quite as convenient as this microtransit approach, where you can wake up in the morning and say, I'd like to go to Charlottesville, and then just book it on your phone and off you go, and you can connect to the 29 North if you'd like. The other small recommendation we're making is there's another jaunt route called the Buckingham North route. Currently, it ends at a church called Our Lady of Peace Church, which is a little bit shy of Fashion Square Mall. So we're recommending that this route should extend to Fashion Square Mall to allow for better coordination with CAT service, which uses Fashion Square Mall as sort of a de facto hub. Okay, let me go back and look at some comments that came up. Okay, Peter says, seems like it would work best if it's tied to an express connection. Okay, yep. So the 7 makes many stops. Exactly. So this is true. The 7 does make many stops. And that is part of the reason that the 29 North is, not changing in this scenario. And we are suggesting that stays as is. Okay. I see Peter's typing. So, okay, I guess we'll move on and we'll see what Peter says. Why such a small service area? Aha, very good. So the next scenario is a larger service area. So this is the second scenario, and it extends, instead of having the zone end at the Ravenna River, it extends the zone to Rio Road. So it's the Rio Road corridor. And I will get into all the details, but let me answer a question real quick from Caetano. Go ahead, Caetano, you have a question?
Hi, so yes, I have a question. I'm thinking that I was extremely satisfied with everything that you were saying until when you said that you agree with all the proposed change by CAT, because I wonder if the scenario 1 or 2 that you're proposing wouldn't require some change from CAT, because if you're just connecting with Route 7, as of right now, the service of CAT doesn't work really well for if you are in one route to quickly connect with another route and then jump to another route and etc. So in other words, if the microtransit is just connecting with Route 7, for many of the routes, you would either have to go back to downtown and then reconnect with another route, or have to stop in a place that's not connected with another route and then walk or find another way to transfer to the other route. Then you could actually go to a place that perhaps was very close to your initial point or starting point. Let's say it's close to Walmart, but it's not connected. Let's say you are in 7 and you wanted to go to somewhere in Route 5 or something like that. So wouldn't it require, as for this microtransit to work well, wouldn't it require for this Walmart to actually become a hub where more than one route actually stops there, so that you can easily go to several directions at the same time?
Yes, so you're exactly right, and that's what we'll talk about in scenario 2. So you're right on all of your comments. So let me just get to those in just a second, but I will back up for 1 second and say the reason that Walmart was chosen is not only because the 7 does provide service there, and the 7 is the kind of the spine of the CAT system. So if you're going to connect to any one route, the 7 is the best route to connect to. The other thing is it's fairly close to the boundary of the zone. So as I mentioned, the important metric to consider is wait time. And wait time is a function of the size of the zone and how many vehicles are in it. If you stretch the zone further, that stretches the wait time. So you either have to invest more in having more vehicles, or you have to do, well, that's really you either change the size of the zone or the number of vehicles assigned to it. So Walmart is the closest significant stop to this first designated zone. So it requires fairly short travel time to get to a connection opportunity. So that's why Walmart. Now, moving on to scenario 2, this scenario has a bigger zone. Because it's a bigger zone, it requires more vehicles. So in order to maintain that 10-minute average wait time, you would need 4 vehicles operating within this zone. So the same service characteristics in terms of weekday only initially, 6 to 9. Now, the connection point to CAT here is one of 2 options. Either Fashion Square Mall, which is a current sort of de facto northern hub for CAT. That hub does allow, as Caetano was saying, it allows you to make connections to a variety of destinations. So if you can make your way to Fashion Square Mall under CAT's proposed network that they've been showing in public meetings, you can at Fashion Square Mall access the Route 5, Route 7, I believe Route 9 and Route 11. So all of those are options for you if you can make your way to Fashion Square Mall. So that's how this scenario differs from scenario 1. You do have a more robust connection situation. Now, the reason we have the shops at Stonefield highlighted here is because there are plans in the works to make that a hub as well, potentially in the future for CAT. And so if that's the case, then we could, that could be the designated hub. If Fashion Square Mall, which many of you know, Fashion Square Mall has kind of seen better days. There's not as much economic activity there as there has been in the past. Who knows what will become of Fashion Square Mall in the future, but it may be that the shops at Stonefield kind of become a hub where, again, you can connect to several different routes. And so we're showing both of these as options for the connection point to get into the larger CAT network. Let's see, Max. Oh no, somebody have a question? No. Okay, Caetano, your hand is still up. Do you still have another question?
No, sorry, thank you.
Okay. Does that explain? Does that sort of address what your concern about being able to connect to multiple routes?
Yes, I think it does. Thank you. Yes. As you were saying, I was thinking, but it's interesting because you're saying this new hub would still be connected in Route 7, right? So in a certain way, Walmart would still be Route 7 would still be a connector between Walmart and this, as you mentioned, de facto hub that CAT has right now. So in a certain way, as long as Route 7 works in an express manner or quickly, as Peter was raising the point, it's still fulfills the necessity of connecting with other routes, right? As well, right. Sorry to just kind of add this topic. Another issue is that right now the fare is free, so there is no issue with that. But historically, unless you had like a monthly card or annual card, you couldn't just combine two routes without having to pay the extra. So perhaps that's another factor that should be taken into account, because if you're just taking a route quickly to go to the hub, then if there is no kind of mechanism that you are not being charged twice, that might be a deterrent. Thank you.
No, that's a good point. We can't really get into the discussion of fares at this point because we don't know exactly who would be the operator of a microtransit service, but regardless of who it is technically possible to integrate the fares. So in other words, if you book your microtransit trip, what some agencies do is you get sort of like this QR code on your phone that you can then present to to the bus operator when you're transferring from microtransit to fixed route as a proof of payment. So you don't necessarily have to pay again, but those details need to be worked out once it's clear who would be the the microtransit operator in the area. So this zone, which is larger than the previous one I showed, has a projected ridership of 75 riders a week per weekday initially. Again, that could grow over time, but that's sort of an initial take. So Peter's asking, who is the target audience to use this in each scenario? Well, that's a great question. Microtransit, it really can serve a broad range of trip types and thus is appealing to a wide range of audiences. And in fact, it works best when it's designed to be sort of a mixed use type of approach. So there, you have the airport that's within the zone, you have the UVA Discovery Park that's in the zone, you have the defense, I'm going to forget the name of the installation there. Maybe somebody can help me out. What's the name of the defense establishment up north by? Okay, hopefully.
NGIC.
Yeah, that. There you go. Yeah. Yes, National Ground. Yes, so you have that. You also have just suburban residential neighborhoods. So the microtransit service can be used for internal circulation, meaning people can get from their home to run their errands, to get to Walmart, to get to a grocery store, or to get to like a pharmacy or something, or it can provide first and last mile connections to complement the regional transit network. So there's a wide range of uses. And then, of course, people may choose to use it to get to the airport as well. So if a person has a flight and they don't want to leave their car at the airport, that would be an option for them as well. Question, why is there a pink area? Why there's a pink area serving microtransit that is perfectly connected to Route 11? Caetano, maybe you can clarify your question. I'm not I'm not sure I
Yeah,
follow.
sorry. Sorry if I'm being kind of too picky, but this is a topic that I find really interesting and important. I just wanted to understand, as far as we're talking about, the larger the pink area is going to be, more costly or more resources are going to need to be dedicated to this area, right? And therefore, I hope implementation is still don't be endangered. But my point is, there seems to be some kind of arbitrary decision between the two sides of the Fashion Square Mall, because in one side the pink area goes far below, quote unquote, and on the other side it doesn't. I wanted to understand why is that reason, and why not the pink area just kind of stops when it reaches more or less the height of Fashion Square Mall.
Yeah, great. That's a great question. So if you'll notice here in scenario 1, there's this pink area that's the Walmart that's outside the zone. So in microtransit zones, the reason that you need a zone at all is because you have to find some way to limit trip lengths. And so there needs to be some geographic limit, or else the other alternative is, if it's like countywide, you would implement distance-based pricing. So if you don't limit the trip lengths, then the service will be bogged down by very, very long trips, and then you'll have very few riders per hour, and so it's very unproductive. So we limit the trip lengths by designating a zone. However, there are key destinations that are critical to the success of the service that are outside the zone. So in this case, it's a connection to CAT. So this is outside the zone. In scenario 2, technically Rio Road is the zone boundary, and this is actually outside the zone, the Fashion Square Mall, and so are the shops at Stonefield. Both of these are out of zone connection opportunities. If the shops at Stonefield becomes that designated hub, vehicles would not make any stops, any pickups or drop-offs after leaving the zone and getting to the hub. So it would just be, express closed door service. So that's why. Does it make sense? Okay.
I guess yes. I'll write you an email maybe. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think arbitrarily you're right. We could draw the line anywhere, so the zone could be here. What we were trying to do is minimize overlap with the CAT network. So there's some overlap, obviously, here with the Route 7 going to the Walmart, but for the most part, we're trying to complement the existing investment that the region has made in transit without competing with it. And so since CAT service, doesn't go far beyond the city boundaries, or it doesn't go, too far beyond Rio Road, with the exception of Walmart. That's why we chose Rio Road as that dividing line. And when we are looking at expanding service, we want to serve areas that aren't currently served. So that's why this zone is what it is. Kevin, did you have a question?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to speak to what I think Caetano's question is that, and to your point also, is that we don't want to duplicate service. So why do we have the microtransit zone actually abutting existing routes, where you would think you would want to maybe back that off by like a quarter mile, assuming that people a quarter mile from an existing route would be able to walk to the stops that are already in there. That's what I was hearing, and maybe that's not exactly what Caetano was saying, but that's what I was hearing, and that made me wonder about that as well.
It's perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good point. We could back it up. We could back it up a little bit. In this case, though, we do have the situation on Route 11 with the senior housing, and the name, of course, slipped my mind again. I know we have a representative from there on the call, but that is an area that's been difficult to serve with fixed route service because of a lack of a signal, basically, on Rio Road. So buses are not able to easily turn left. So this zone encompasses that senior development as well. So there, it doesn't help people too much that are coming from points south, but it certainly does for people coming from points north. They would be able to access the senior center there. Okay, so let me move on to the next slide about scenario 2. The other changes related to scenario 2, same as scenario 1, we are supporting CAT's proposed changes to Route 7 and Route 5. This scenario actually eliminates the 29 North service. And the reason that it does is because under this scenario, you do have the option of using microtransit to get to a hub where you can make many different connections. And so there's sort of this trade-off. On the one hand, you have a one-seat ride that the 29 Express offers to UVA, the UVA hospital, and downtown. On the other hand, in this scenario, you have, you know, a one-seat ride to a place like Fashion Square Mall, where the connection opportunities would be fairly frequent, and then you would have a one-seat ride to many more places. So total, it's a two-seat ride because you have microtransit plus a CAT route, but you have many more destinations you could access than the 29 North Express offers. Plus, you have all-day schedules versus the 29 North Express, which offers a limited schedule today. So that's in this scenario. Obviously, neither one of these scenarios is meant to satisfy everybody. So we just wanted to have some differentiation between the scenarios. And later, we'll ask everybody to take a survey and tell us what you think. But scenario 1 keeps the 29 North Express route. Scenario 2 removes it. So, and then the other final change is that Buckingham North route that in this scenario, again, we are recommending extending to Fashion Square Mall instead of the Our Lady of Peace Church. Okay, so that's the 29 North corridor. We're going to move on to Pantops next, unless anybody has any questions or comments about the 29 North. And we can come back at the end and revisit, but in the interest of time, move on. Okay, so next we have the Pantops study area. So here we're trying to, again, achieve transit expansion. And in scenario 1 of the Pantops scenarios, that expansion is achieved through an additional, a new fixed route service, which is this pinkish purplish line here, dotted line. We're calling it the Pantops North route. So the Route 10 shown here is actually the Route 10 that CATS is currently considering. It's not exactly the current alignment. The current alignment takes a slightly different route as it makes its way to the Jefferson Hospital, but this is the Route 10 that is most likely to become the Route 10 in a couple of months. And so because of that, we are overlaying it with another route called Pantops North that serves some of the growing multifamily housing communities that are north of Richmond Road. So that's scenario 1. It would require one additional transit vehicle in order to have hourly service. So we're recommending weekday only service from 6 to 9, and then connection opportunities at the Pantops Shopping Center, so people could transfer from this new route to Route 10. They could do the same at the Ravenna Ridge Shopping Center here. So that's the performance indicators that we're looking at here. So hourly service, as I mentioned, this route would initially generate approximately 20 new riders per weekday, and the reason I say 20 new riders is because there would be more than 20 people we project using this route, but some of them would transfer from or transition from existing service on the Route 10. So some of the current Route 10 riders would likely use this route instead, but overall a net of 20 new riders per weekday initially. Any questions on that before we look at scenario 2? Scenario 2 is also trying to expand coverage in Pantops, but instead of doing it with fixed route service, there's a microtransit pilot project proposed. So it would cover a larger area. So it would expand service to the north of Richmond Road, but it would also expand service a bit south. So Pantops Drive, which is this road here, has current Route 10 service, but under CAT's proposed realignment of Route 10, that corridor would actually lose service. So microtransit would restore service back to that corridor that would be lost with this realignment of Route 10. Okay. The proposed ridership for this microtransit service would be 25 riders a weekday per weekday, and that could be achieved with two vehicles. Any questions on Pantops? Okay. So then we'll move on to Monticello next. So here there's two scenarios like all the others. The first scenario is doing a couple of things. Number one, it is using. So I guess I should take a step back and say that Monticello runs their own shuttles. They run their own fleet of shuttles that operate along a loop within the Monticello area. The loop connects the Monticello Visitor Center to the actual Thomas Jefferson estate, up at the top of the mountain. So this scenario adds another route that will be operated by the Monticello shuttle. And that route would connect. The visitor center with the PBCC, the community college workforce services parking lot, which is just beyond the Monticello property. So the idea here is that parking lot actually does have existing CAT service, and so if we could make that connection once an hour or so between Monticello and that parking lot, then people could make their way using CAT Route 1 or 2B to that PBCC parking lot, and from there make a connection into Monticello. So that's the first part of the recommendation for scenario one. The second part of the recommendation is to transition the internal loop that is currently operated by Monticello staff, to transition that to an automated vehicle, or an autonomous vehicle, I should say. So Monticello has said that they, like every other transit operator in the country, is struggling with staffing. This is sort of a national issue where nobody can find enough drivers that have CDLs, commercial driver's licenses, and so that is creating difficulties in terms of filling schedules and so on. So with an autonomous vehicle, likely you would not need drivers that have CDLs. In other words, you just could have somebody monitoring the autonomous vehicle, but they're not actually driving the vehicle, and so all they would need to do is stop the vehicle in case of an emergency. But it opens up to a wider pool of applicants who could participate, who could fill that role versus CDL drivers that they're using today. So the two parts of this, as I said, is this new route that is not autonomous, that connects Monticello Visitor Center to the parking lot of PBCC, and then the autonomous vehicle that is running this internal loop between the Visitor Center and the Thomas Jefferson home. Any questions on that? Okay, so that's scenario one. Scenario two, in scenario two, the Monticello shuttle stays as is, so it's not necessarily autonomous, although it could be. But the access to the visitor center is not done through a fixed route connection, but rather through a proposed microtransit zone that would encompass not only Monticello, but several neighborhoods and several parts of Albemarle County south of I-64. So this area that's south of I-64 is not very conducive to fixed route service because it just does not have a grid style network of streets. It has a lot of dead end streets, a lot of kind of cul-de-sacs and circuitous streets and so on. So that's an environment that is much better served with a demand response service. So if this zone as proposed is implemented, we would recommend that it also stretches as far as the Monticello Visitor Center. So if a person makes their way to the PBCC parking lot or several other locations, they would be able to make a transfer for that first last mile connection to Monticello. So this is meant to appeal both to staff at Monticello and visitors. It could be used by all of the above. The projected ridership for this zone would be 33 riders a day with 2 vehicles and 10-minute average wait times. So those again are the 2 scenarios for Monticello: fixed route and microtransit. Okay, so the next thing I want to cover is a survey that we've put together. If there are no questions about the scenarios, we'll move on to the survey where we would like everybody to give feedback on what you have seen tonight. Let me open up this window. A second. Okay. So if you go to the TJPDC website, everybody can see that, right? The website. Okay. So if you go to the website and you look under projects and transit planning, there might be a faster way to get there. Laura, if you know of a faster way, please speak up. But is there a faster way to get there, or is that the?
I don't. I was just gonna paste the link in the
chat. We'll do that
but
too.
For people to show, yeah. I don't.
But if you're trying to describe if you're trying to tell anyone where to find it, this is where you would do it. So there's a link called project website, and the project website is the website for this expansion study, and it looks like this. And there's announcements and study area maps and so on. If you look under announcements, there's a link to a survey, both in English and in Spanish. If you click on the English survey or the Spanish survey, you're taken to a new page that has an introduction of the, everything we talked about today, the 3 study areas. And then it gets into a description of the study areas themselves, the 29 North, for example, followed by a description of each of the 2 scenarios. So scenario 1 and scenario 2. And the maps, change as you look at the 2 scenarios, as you read about them. And then at the end of each section, there's a survey. It's a fairly simple survey. It's just asking, do you prefer scenario 1, scenario 2, or the current service? And then there's a free response section where we're inviting people to say what they like or dislike about each of the 2 scenarios. And that repeats itself for each of the study areas. So the Pantops area has its own survey. The Monticello area has its own survey. And that's what it looks like. And I think Laura just posted the English and Spanish surveys into the window here. The surveys will be up through the end of the month, at least. We'll kind of monitor to see, the response trajectory. If we see that the responses are still increasing at the end of the month, then we'll potentially leave it up for longer. Or if they are starting to fall off, then we'll close the survey. Do you have a URL?
Can I ask?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I didn't raise my hand, but can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay. No, I wanted to ask you this survey. I guess that this question I find valid for whatever entity that's trying to receive community input. What's the target audience of this survey for you? What's your criteria of actually how can I say, checking if you were able to receive relevant feedback from the audience you were wanting to receive feedback, and if it's a matter of only number of answers, or if you're actually capturing any other sorts of demographic information that help you understand that you're actually receiving relevant or representative input.
Yeah, so at this point, we are keeping it pretty open-ended. So we're asking, just people can provide whatever information they would like to provide. We encourage you to share this with any clients or customers or friends or neighbors or anything. We want as broad a response rate as possible, but we're never going to have necessarily a representative sample, no matter what survey we develop, because it's always going to be a self-selected group. So other than like a census type survey that's done door to door, it's never going to be fully representative. But we want to kind of get a sense of the trends, like what are people responding, how are they responding, and how many responses are there that support one scenario or the other. And those are the recommendations that, that'll help us inform our final recommendations. That being said, when before anything is implemented on the ground, whether it's Kat or John or anybody else, they will be required to go through a public input process as well. So that's like what you're seeing now. You know, Kat's going through these public meeting presentations in order to, you know, vet their recommendations. So we're developing recommendations. Our audience ultimately is Albemarle County and the TJPDC. You know, we're presenting to our recommendations to them. If these are going into implementation, I'm confident there will be another set of, you know, public and community meetings before anything is implemented.
I just want to express that I agree with you, but at the same time, although I agree with you with your statement that there is always going to be bias in the survey unless there is a census or etc. But if you are, in my opinion, if you are tracking some sort of demographic or neighborhood of where the person lives and etc., then you can try to understand trends with some sort of how can I say, controlling by some sort of specific demographic information, so that you can understand. You make somehow an assessment of how different demographics are perceiving the situation and how they would rate it. But it's just a suggestion, and yeah, thank you for listening.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good idea. It's a balancing act, I suppose, because the longer you make the survey, the lower the response rate you get, and it's still going to be a situation where you're dealing with people who took the time to take the survey, who may or may not be representative of the larger community. But it's a good comment. I mean, we'll take that into consideration. Let's see. Somebody said project website has buttons for both languages. Great. And somebody's asking to keep the survey open longer. Yeah, that's not a problem. We can certainly keep the survey open for 2, 3, up to 4 weeks, perhaps. So the important thing usually is we can sort of track the trends, and if there's interest in the survey, and we encourage everybody on this call to spread the word about the survey so that there will be interest, posted to your social media or anywhere else, because we do want as representative a sample as possible. Okay, any questions about either the project website, the survey, or any of the things that we talked about? Yes, Peter.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm actually about to leave this meeting and go to the Fifth and Avon Community Advisory Committee meeting. I'm not going to talk about this there, but has there been, like, Kevin might actually be a good person to talk to. Have there been discussions about expanding transit in the southern neighborhoods?
There have been discussions about that in the proposals that Kat has right now that they've been advertising, and you can see it in this map that's open right now. It does have that expanded transit going down to the Mill Creek area and going through there. So that's an existing proposal by Kat that's separate from this study that the TJPDC is looking at. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess it kind of does. I guess my only comment is that between the two Monticello options, one is way more dramatic than the other in a way that's different than the other two projects. The other two projects are sort of tactical changes compared to this one. This one compares, one option is serving Monticello and the other is serving the southern neighborhood, which is a pretty huge difference. And like I don't know, like the problem that is solved in those two options is very different, I guess, much more so than the other two projects.
You're absolutely right. It's a very good observation. I know you have to go, but if you have 1 minute, I can kind of give you a little bit of background on that thought process.
Definitely.
So as I mentioned earlier, microtransit works best as a mixed use type of service. So if you try to develop a microtransit service that is very specifically targeted to one small group, let's say commuters to Monticello or employees to Monticello, it's going to be a fairly low productivity service. So, with a shuttle route, Monticello is already operating their own shuttle. They could take one of those shuttles that they're using now to circulate through the property to once an hour go over to make that connection. So it's not a huge lift. But if you designate a microtransit service to just this very small niche, it will generate very low ridership most likely. And so if you're going to do a microtransit service, you might as well do it in a way that benefits a larger group, and you make it a mixed use service. So that includes residential neighborhoods, it includes Monticello, it includes some business and retail connections as well, and educational obviously as well. So that was a thought process. It doesn't work well if it's a very focused niche.
Yes, I agree with that. I agree with that analysis. However, I'm thinking about like how I would communicate about this, and communicating to the community about this potential new option for them would not be captured by me saying that the county is looking at a new service to Monticello. It would provide new service to Monticello, but it's something much larger than that. I guess that's what I would say. It's not a judgment. It's just like a musing that I'm doing here.
No, I think you really captured exactly the situation. We just had this dilemma of like, how do we come up with two scenarios that are focused on a tiny area? Well, it's not tiny, but just focused only on Monticello. And so so this was kind of in order to achieve the connection to Monticello with a different mode, we justified that by saying, well, we're going to make a bigger zone that's worth, if you're going to do it right. So yeah. I don't have any other guidance for you in terms of how you present this. Okay.
I guess I don't know if Peter's jumped off yet, but I just want to make sure that it's understood that these are just, the first blush at some considerations, and they're going to have to be, kind of hammered out quite a bit more. So there may be quite a few changes, and we don't even know which option we're selecting yet. So these are giving us some things kind of to get feedback from, I think, and we'll see where it goes from there.
Yeah, I mean, I really kind of like thinking more expansively about how we're going to serve the southern neighborhoods. I mean, Kevin's sat with me, I'm sure, in CAC meetings where we're talking about like, do we run the Mill Creek bus back on Avon, or do we just go down Route 20? Like, I like exploding the question a little bit like this.
Yeah. Okay. Well, very, very good. So that concludes our formal presentation. We'll stay on to take additional questions if there are any, but I would just like to again stress that we hope that people share the survey, take the survey, share the survey, spread the word, and help us get a pretty robust response rate. All right.
Thank you all.
Lee, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. I just wanted to say that microtransit is a great idea. That's long overdue. That's fills in the gap between the fixed route, because fixed route alone won't do it. So the microtransit is definitely needed, and having the choice of the scenarios is great. But just having microtransit would be a big deal.
Yep. Thanks, Lee. Caetano?
Yeah, thank you. I know that it likely goes beyond the scope of your project as of right now, but I wanted to say that, in my opinion, and as a community advocate, I think that micromobility should also be a solution for areas that are tangential to the areas that you are selecting for micromobility, but within Charlottesville area, right? Because it's very difficult to make a statement that, oh, the people living in this area of the map need micromobility, but people living here they don't. Microtransit, sorry. And the reality is that that's not true. Probably people living I hear a map that's kind of yellow green, right? And people that are living just in the Charlottesville side of this area, but just kind of by a few I don't know, 100 of I think in meters. Sorry, I'm having some issue here, but like 0.1 mile or 0.2 miles or something like that. It's probably the same situation, and that's a topic that I am willing and I'm likely going to advocate for Charlotte to also think as of a solution. So therefore, I wanted to bring the topic here to say, is there a way for you when providing suggestions, recommendations, to also consider in case Charlottesville adopts something similar in these outside areas of Charlottesville that suffer from the same lack of density situation or less routes serving with high frequency. In case they're wanting, like, how could you expand the microtransit you are suggesting? Is there, I don't know, because it just seems to be a very unproductive exercise for Albemarle County to plan for a perfect microtransit for Albemarle County, and then Charlottesville try to solve the situation in with a whole new process, and then you have I don't know, 2 microtransit servers in the area, and they are serving tangential areas that are kind of very close together. I don't know. So I hope you see my point, but I'm just.
I see your point. Yeah. No, I absolutely see your point. What I would say is that, so our study has a very specific scope, very specific focus. There's another study that's currently ongoing. Lucinda maybe could say a word or two about that, but there's a regional, there's a broader vision, like sort of I think transit vision study. Is that the name of is that the proper name? Transit vision study? Or something to that effect, that is ongoing as well.
It's the regional transit vision study plan, regional transit vision plan for Charlottesville area. Katana was in our stakeholder meeting that we had last week. So
yeah, so I think that might be the most appropriate forum to advocate for this mode of service, for the broader region, because we in this study are focused very, very specifically. Even the recommendation that we've made, as was pointed out, goes far beyond Monticello. We actually, were tasked with looking at a solution for Monticello. It just so happened that we couldn't find a second solution without expanding that. But our focus is very narrow on this in this study. So I think the regional vision study is a better forum for you to advocate for microtransit more broadly. Yeah.
I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, thank you all. Have a good night, and please take the survey. Bye.